history. If you want to see how this incredible story unfolds, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really happened behind the scenes. Now let's dive into the chaos that erupted when two strong personalities collided on live television. The morning had begun like any other at the View Studios. Denzel Washington arrived early, as was his custom, greeting the production staff with his characteristic warmth and professionalism. He had been booked to discuss his upcoming directorial project, a passion project he had been developing for years. The actor was in good spirits, having just wrapped a successful press tour that had been nothing but positive. Joy Behar, however, had different plans for the interview. She had spent the previous evening researching what she called tough questions that would make headlines. Her producer had mentioned the need for more viral moments, and Joy saw this as her opportunity to create one. She had a list of controversial topics written on index cards, hidden beneath her usual interview notes. As the cameras began rolling, the other co-hosts welcomed Denzel with genuine enthusiasm. Whoopi Goldberg introduced him with glowing praise, mentioning his decades of acclaimed performances and his recent philanthropic work. The audience applauded warmly as Denzel smiled and waved, completely unaware of what Joy had planned. "Denzel, it's always wonderful to have you here," Whoopi began. "Tell us about this new project you're directing." Denzel leaned forward, his eyes lighting up as he began to speak. "Well, Whoopi, this film has been a dream of mine for over a decade. It's the story of a young man in the 1960 seconds who overcomes incredible odds to become the first in his family to attend college. It's really about hope, perseverance, and the power of education to transform lives." The other co-hosts nodded appreciatively, asking thoughtful follow-up questions about the casting process and the challenges of period filmmaking. Denzel was in his element, speaking passionately about the project that clearly meant so much to him. The interview was flowing smoothly, exactly the kind of positive, engaging content that audiences loved. But Joy was growing impatient. She glanced at her hidden notes and decided it was time to steer the conversation in a different direction. As Denzel finished explaining his approach to working with young actors, Joy suddenly interrupted. "That's all very nice, Denzel, but let's talk about something more current," Joy said, her tone shifting noticeably. "There's been a lot of talk lately about diversity in Hollywood, and frankly, some people are saying that actors like you have had it easier because of your race. What's your response to critics who say you've benefited from affirmative action in casting?" The studio fell silent. The other co-hosts looked uncomfortable, clearly not expecting this line of questioning. Denzel's expression remained composed, but those who knew him well could see the slight tightening around his eyes. "I'm sorry, Joy, but I think there might be some confusion in your question," Denzel replied calmly. "Are you suggesting that my 30-plus-year career, my training at Fordham and the American Conservatory Theater, and the work I've put into every single role I've ever played is somehow illegitimate?" Joy doubled down, seemingly emboldened by what she perceived as an opportunity for confrontation. "I'm not saying illegitimate, but let's be honest. Hollywood has quotas now. There's pressure to cast people of color. Don't you think that's given you advantages that other actors don't have?" The tension in the studio was now palpable. Audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Whoopi tried to interject, but Joy continued before she could speak. "I mean, when you won your Oscar for Training Day, wasn't that really about Hollywood trying to make up for past discrimination rather than purely about your performance?" Denzel set down his coffee cup slowly and deliberately. When he looked up at Joy, his expression was still controlled, but there was steel in his voice. "Joy, I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. Are you telling me that my Oscar was some kind of consolation prize? That the Academy voters didn't actually think I gave the best performance that year, but they just felt sorry for me?" "I'm just asking the questions that people are thinking," Joy replied, though her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "There's a conversation happening about merit versus diversity, and I think our viewers deserve to hear your perspective on whether race played a role in your success." The other co-hosts were now visibly uncomfortable. Sarah Haynes looked down at her hands, while Sunny Hostin appeared to be preparing to jump in and redirect the conversation. But Denzel wasn't finished. "Let me tell you something, Joy," Denzel said, his voice rising slightly but still maintaining its dignity. "I have never, not once in my entire career, asked anyone to give me anything because of my race. Every audition I've ever walked into, every role I've ever fought for, every performance I've ever given has been on my own merit. And for you to sit here and suggest otherwise, on national television, is not only disrespectful to me, it's disrespectful to every actor of color who has ever worked in this industry. Joy realized she might have pushed too far, but instead of backing down, she made the mistake of doubling down again. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, Denzel, but these are legitimate questions. If we can't have honest conversations about race and opportunity in America, then what's the point of having you on the show? I thought you were someone who could handle tough questions. The condescending tone in Joy's voice was the final straw. Denzel sat back in his chair, and for a moment, the studio was completely quiet except for the hum of the cameras. When Denzel finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades of experience and quiet authority that had made him one of the most respected figures in entertainment. Joy, let me explain something to you about tough questions, Denzel began, his tone measured but unmistakably firm. A tough question challenges someone to think deeper, to reveal truth, to engage in meaningful dialogue. What you're doing isn't asking tough questions. You're perpetuating harmful stereotypes disguised as journalism. Joy's face flushed red, clearly not expecting such a direct response. She had anticipated that Denzel might get defensive, giving her more ammunition for her attack, but instead he was turning the tables on her with surgical precision. I think you're being overly sensitive, Joy shot back, her voice taking on a sharper edge. This is The View. We ask hard questions here. We don't coddle our guests just because they're famous. If you can't handle a little scrutiny about your career, maybe you should stick to easier interviews. The audience audibly gasped. Several people could be heard murmuring in disapproval. Whoopi looked mortified, while the other co-hosts exchanged worried glances. This was clearly spiraling beyond anything they had anticipated. Denzel leaned forward, his presence commanding the entire studio's attention. Scrutiny? Is that what you call questioning the legitimacy of my life's work? Joy, I've been in this business longer than some of your viewers have been alive. I've worked with directors like Spike Lee, Tony Scott, and Frank Capra. I've shared scenes with some of the greatest actors of our time. And you're sitting here suggesting that all of that happened because of my skin color rather than my ability? I'm not suggesting anything, Joy replied defensively, though her voice was starting to waver. I'm asking questions that reflect what some people in America are thinking. Isn't it better to address these issues head-on rather than pretend they don't exist? Some people in America? Denzel repeated, his eyebrows raised. Or is this what you're thinking, Joy? Because it sounds to me like you're using the American public as cover for your own prejudiced assumptions. Tell me, when you interview white actors about their achievements, do you question whether they earned them? When Brad Pitt won his Oscar, did you ask him if it was because of Hollywood quotas for white men? The comparison hit like a thunderbolt. Joy opened her mouth to respond but found herself speechless for a moment. The studio audience was now clearly on Denzel's side, with several people nodding in agreement and others looking directly at Joy with expressions of disapproval. Sunny Hostin attempted to step in. Maybe we should move on to talking about the film itself, she suggested diplomatically. But Joy wasn't ready to let it go. Perhaps feeling cornered, she made another crucial mistake. Look, Denzel, I've been doing this job for years. I've interviewed presidents, world leaders, and countless celebrities. I know how to ask the right questions to get to the truth. And the truth is that Hollywood has changed, and there are opportunities now that didn't exist before. The truth? Denzel's voice rose slightly, though he maintained his composure. Joy, let me tell you about truth. The truth is that I auditioned for Malcolm X and was told I wasn't right for the role of a black historical figure. The truth is that I spent years fighting to get serious dramatic roles because casting directors saw my skin color and automatically assumed I could only play criminals or sidekicks. The truth is that I've had to work twice as hard and be twice as good just to be considered equal. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. And now you want to sit here and tell me that I've had it easy? That my success is somehow unearned? You're not asking tough questions, Joy. You're perpetuating the same ignorant attitudes that I've been fighting against my entire career. Joy's face was now noticeably red, and her usual confidence had evaporated. But instead of acknowledging her mistake, she chose to escalate further. I think you're twisting my words, Denzel. I never said you had it easy. But you can't deny that there's been a push for diversity in recent years that has created new opportunities. New opportunities. Denzel stood up from his chair, his full presence now commanding the studio. Joy, I won my first Oscar nomination in 1987 for Cry Freedom. That's over 35 years ago. I've been building this career since before diversity was even a conversation in Hollywood boardrooms. Every single achievement in my career predates whatever recent push for diversity you're talking about. The other co-hosts were now visibly uncomfortable with how far Joy had taken this. Whoopi was shaking her head slightly, while Sarah looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. The studio audience was completely silent, hanging on every word of this extraordinary confrontation. Joy, realizing she was losing control of the situation, tried a different approach. All I'm saying is that it's worth examining how race factors into success in Hollywood. That's not controversial, that's just honest conversation. Honest conversation? Denzel's laugh was without humor. Joy, there's nothing honest about what you're doing right now. You ambushed me with loaded questions designed to diminish my accomplishments. You're not interested in examining anything. You're interested in creating controversy for ratings. He looked directly into the camera, addressing the audience at home. Ladies and gentlemen watching at home, this is what happens when someone confuses provocation with journalism. When someone thinks that tearing down accomplished people makes for good television, Joy was now clearly rattled. I resent the implication that I'm not a professional journalist, Denzel. I've been asking tough questions long before you became a household name. This comment proved to be Joy's biggest mistake yet. Denzel turned back to her with an expression that could freeze water. Before I became a household name, he repeated slowly. Joy, I was winning theater awards when you were still trying to figure out what you wanted to be when you grew up. I was studying Shakespeare at Juilliard while you were doing stand-up comedy. And you have the audacity to question my credentials? The studio fell into complete silence. Even the camera operators seemed frozen in place. Joy had clearly pushed one of the most respected actors in Hollywood too far, and everyone in the room knew it. Now you listen to me very carefully, Denzel continued, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the studio. I came here today to talk about a film that means something to me. A project that could inspire young people to believe in themselves. Instead, you've chosen to use this platform to attack my character and question my integrity. That says everything about you and nothing about me. Joy, perhaps realizing she had crossed a line but unable to back down gracefully, made one final attempt to justify her approach. Denzel, I think you're overreacting. This is television. We ask provocative questions. That's what gets people talking. That's what makes good TV. The moment those words left her mouth, everyone in the studio knew she had made a catastrophic error. Denzel's expression shifted from controlled anger to something far more dangerous, complete disappointment. Good TV? Denzel repeated, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, which somehow made it more intimidating than if he had shouted. Joy, let me tell you what good TV is. Good TV informs people. Good TV elevates the conversation. Good TV brings out the best in people, not the worst. What you're doing right now, this isn't good TV. This is exploitation disguised as entertainment. He took a step closer to the panel, his presence filling the space between them. You think attacking a guest's integrity makes for good television? You think diminishing someone's life work creates compelling content? That's not journalism, Joy. That's tabloid trash. Joy's voice became defensive and shrill. I've been in this business for decades, Denzel. I know what works. I know what audiences want to see. They want real conversations, not fluff pieces where everyone just smiles and promotes their latest project. Real conversations? Denzel shook his head in disbelief. Joy, you wouldn't recognize a real conversation if it walked up and introduced itself to you. A real conversation requires respect, curiosity, and genuine interest in learning something new. What you've done today is ambush journalism at its worst. Whoopi finally found her voice and tried desperately to salvage the situation. Maybe we can all take a step back here and... But Joy cut her off. apparently determined to have the last word. "I'm not going to apologize for doing my job, Denzel. If you can't handle being challenged, maybe you should reconsider doing live television interviews." The audacity of this statement left the entire studio stunned. Even Joy seemed to realize immediately that she had gone too far. But the words were already out there, recorded for posterity. Denzel stared at her for a long moment, then slowly nodded his head. "You know what, Joy? You're absolutely right about one thing. I should reconsider doing interviews like this. Because what you've shown me today is that some people in this business have forgotten what professionalism looks like." He turned to address Whoopi and the other co-hosts. "Whoopi, ladies, I want to apologize to you for what this has become. This isn't what any of us signed up for today. You invited me here as a guest, and I respect this show and what it usually represents." Then he turned back to Joy, his voice carrying the weight of absolute moral authority. "But Joy, what you've done today is unconscionable. You've taken a platform that reaches millions of people and used it to perpetuate harmful stereotypes about successful people of color. You've suggested that my achievements are somehow less valid because of my race. You've questioned my integrity, my professionalism, and my right to be treated with basic human respect." Joy tried to interrupt. "I never said, don't." Denzel's single word cut through her protest like a blade. "Don't you dare try to walk this back now. Every person in this studio heard what you said. Every viewer watching at home heard what you said. You questioned whether my Oscar was legitimate. You suggested I've benefited from racial quotas. You implied that my 3-decade career is somehow unearned." He looked directly into the main camera, speaking to the audience at home. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is what institutional racism looks like in 2024. It's not always burning crosses and segregated water fountains. Sometimes it's a talk show host who thinks she can diminish a black man's achievements and call it journalism." The studio was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Joy's face had gone from red to pale, clearly realizing the magnitude of what had just happened. Denzel continued, his voice never rising but carrying incredible power. "Joy, you asked me if I could handle tough questions. Let me ask you one. How does it feel to know that you've just demonstrated everything that's wrong with media today? How does it feel to know that you've used your platform not to inform or educate, but to tear down and diminish?" Joy's voice was barely audible. "I was just trying to have an honest conversation about..." "About what?" Denzel cut her off. "About whether I deserve my success? About whether the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences made a mistake when they recognized my work? About whether directors like Spike Lee and Tony Scott chose me for roles because they felt sorry for me rather than because I was the best actor for the job?" He shook his head in disgust. "You want to have a conversation about race in America? Let's talk about how a successful black man can't even appear on a talk show to discuss his work without having his achievements questioned. Let's talk about how some people are so uncomfortable with black excellence that they need to find ways to explain it away." The other co-hosts sat in stunned silence. The audience was completely transfixed by this unprecedented display of dignity in the face of disrespect. "You know what the real tragedy is here, Joy?" Denzel continued. "You had an opportunity today to have a meaningful conversation about storytelling, about the power of film to change hearts and minds, about the importance of representation in media. Instead, you chose to make this about your own need to create controversy." He began unbuttoning his microphone pack. "I've been in this business for over 40 years. I've dealt with racism, both subtle and overt. I've overcome obstacles that you couldn't even imagine. And I've never, not once, let someone disrespect me the way you have today without consequence." Joy made one last desperate attempt. "Denzel, please, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding, Joy." His voice was final. "You showed your true colors today, and now I'm showing mine. I don't have to sit here and be insulted by someone who mistakes ignorance for insight." He handed his microphone to a stunned production assistant and looked one last time at Joy. "You want to know what makes good television? Treating your guests with respect. Something you clearly never learned." As Denzel walked toward the studio exit, Whoopi called after him. "Denzel, please." He turned back briefly, his expression softening toward the other hosts. Whoopee, this isn't about you or the show. This is about someone who forgot that behind every success story is a human being who deserves basic decency. And with that, one of Hollywood's most respected actors walked off the set of The View, leaving behind a stunned studio and a host who had just learned that attacking someone's character and achievements has consequences. The cameras kept rolling as Joy sat in shocked silence, finally understanding that her attempt to create viral television had backfired spectacularly. She had wanted to make headlines, and she had succeeded, but not in the way she had intended. What started as a routine promotional interview had become a masterclass in